me? Is this possible to, could someone let me know whether you can hear me or not? Hopefully you can see. Yes, right. I'm not going to present because I think that's what's confusing matters. I see me kind of talking and seeing. So let me just check. Can you still hear me now? If you can't, please let me know. Voting. Okay, so I was just talking about the help that I can give you, and I'll send out more details. Basically, cut to the chase. If you need any more help after this, please do let me know. I'm really happy to kind of start a conversation with you. I have got my Facebook starting next week, and I will be telling you more about that with the code that you can have a discount on. But today we're going to talk about the fundamentals around sleep. So I'll just crack on because I've wasted just time already. So the very thing I wanted to make sure that you understand is the bits around the sleep science and the guidelines that we give out as sleep consultants to make sure that you have that basis of understanding, because if you have that, then you can build from that and start to understand your little one's sleep. So all of this is relevant from a tiny baby, a newborn, even up to, you know, kind of adult sleep, because the concepts and the science stays the same. Really, it's very complicated sleep, but these are the sort of the basic things to understand. If you haven't heard of something called a sleep cycle, then this is what I'm going to talk through now, because a sleep cycle forms the basis of every journey of sleep that we all go into. And a sleep cycle is essentially a circle that goes round, and we have different component parts of sleep. So in a newborn baby, it's fairly simplistic and it lasts around half an hour, maybe slightly longer. And then at the 4-month mark, the body basically changes and it lengthens out the sleep cycle to around about 45 minutes. And then it also has more complex sleep cycles. So we have around about 4 to 5 stages of sleep. And they go from light sleep to REM sleep, which is the dreamlike sleep, to the deep sleep, which is the restorative sleep. And every time we go to sleep, we go round in these circles and keep going round. Now, the reason why it's so important is because at the end of a sleep cycle, there is this moment of wakefulness, and it's absolutely fine. And this is why people will talk about your baby never sleeping through the night, because they don't. They wake up at the end of the sleep cycle and then they go back into the next sleep cycle, which is why we get these kind of rhythms of sleep that happen. And the reason why it's important is if you've got a child that is waking up more frequently than you are happy with, then you need to look at what's happening in that moment of wakefulness. Because what we do when we look at self-settling, and this concept of self-settling, is understanding that if a child needs help to go to sleep, then actually what we find is that they can then need help to go back to sleep when they are going into the next sleep cycle. So you imagine a world whereby you've got a kind of a child that's helped to sleep. Perhaps they're being rocked to sleep or fed to sleep, or they've got a dummy that falls out. All of these things are potential sleep props, we call them, and they're all about helping a child to settle, but sometimes they can stop the child from going back into the next sleep cycle. Now, if you do one of these things and your sleep is okay, or you're happy just to understand it and perhaps compensate for it, for example, the dummy falling out, you put it back in and your child goes back to sleep again, that is fine. I'm just here to tell you why they might be kind of waking. So once we've kind of understood that, we can start to build on the pillars of sleep. So that is the first thing to talk about. So the other sort of sciencey bits to understand are things that we can do naturally to help our children sleep better. And this is where you get into the kind of very much the gentle sleep camp. And I suppose, you know, it's important to note that I sit across a variety of strategies. I don't have a kind of a one size fits all type approach, because I think it's important that you work on the basis of what works for you. So in the gentle sleep kind of strategies, it's all about trying to get your child in the best environment for sleep, best routine for sleep, and helping them to sleep as naturally as possible without forcing things too much. And we'll talk about the other angles of things perhaps later on. So when we're considering the best setup for sleep, it's important to think about how your child and how, you know, us as adults actually prepare ourselves for sleep. One of the body's great advantages is the production of the hormone melatonin, which you may have heard of. And that is the hormone that makes us feel a bit sleepy. So it's that hormone that, you know, kind of when we going to bed at night time, you sort of start to feel a bit snoozy, or if you're kind of getting ready for bed, that's the hormone that will help us to feel like that. And so if we can play that to our advantage and help our children to produce the melatonin, it can do a bit of the job for us. So that's a real bonus. Now, melatonin is produced in accordance with a couple of things. And the first one is light level. So if you've got a very bright lit environment, then the melatonin won't be quite so well produced. And this is why in older children, especially if they've got issues settling, we talk about reducing screen time before bedtime, because any screens emit the blue light, even though you don't see it, it's just in the light waves, and that can stop the melatonin from being produced. That's why we also recommend that you dim light levels in your bedtime routine, so that they can be the optimum level for the melatonin production. Now, it's also produced in accordance with the body clock, and this is called like the circadian rhythm, if you've heard of that. So the circadian rhythm flows through each day, and actually it helps us to feel, helps us to like wake up in the morning, because it will wake us up at a certain time. It'll also help us to kind of feel hungry at certain times, but it also helps us to feel you know, that it's time to get ready for bed. So that's why as sleep consultants, we promote a regular bedtime, because it helps the body clock manage the day and help us feel sleepy at that time, because it works with the melatonin. So that's also important to know, that you can be consistent about your kind of bedtime. It can help your child to settle well. And then the other thing from a sciencey kind of point of view is the regressions. And I think it's worthwhile to note, because often I get a lot of questions about those, and, you know, there can be a regression potentially for anything, because regressions really are developmental changes, and they are changes in the way that your child is, you know, kind of developing. So the 4-month regression is the sleep change I've spoken about. The other changes might be to do with perhaps movement. Other changes can be the speech, or perhaps you know, kind of just more movement type based. Teething can also cause regressions as well, in terms of the pain that it can actually give a child. So all of these things are moments in time, and I think the most important thing to remember is that they will pass. They don't have to be the cause of terrible sleep. They can just be the thing that's happening in that moment. If you feel you're in a kind of a regression phase, or a leap as they're determined sometimes, wait maybe a week, and then it might be time to think about making some changes, because they shouldn't last forever. So I really want to make sure, the next thing to say is that if you have a baby that's under 12 or 18 months, actually have a look at the Lullaby Trust for their guidelines. They are amazing in terms of resource for helping you understand how to get your child to sleep safely in a, you know, the key things are a clear, safe space for them to sleep in, a waterproof, breathable mattress for them to sleep in, a non-confused environment, keeping away from any kind of smoke or alcohol or anything along those lines, and making sure that if you're co-sleeping, you're doing it safely. And they have amazing guidelines on that, and they give you the best layout for that. So make sure you check out the Lullaby Trust for that. One of the things coming into the kind of the warmer part of the year is to make sure that the room temperature is a good, well, within the range that's recommended. And the recommended range is between 16 to 21 degrees, which is often a lot cooler than we think. So we sleep better in cooler environments. It's just the way that the body sort of settles down to sleep. So think about that when you're kind of getting into those warmer times. You know, maybe it's about turning the radiators down. Obviously in the summer, when we can't quite get things cold enough, and we have that odd crazy days like we did last week of heat, then it's hard to regulate. But things like fans, or just leaving the windows open, maybe the curtains closed to keep the temperature down, are good advice in that way. So obviously when we are looking at sleep changes, if you have any kind of medical concerns or developmental concerns, then it's really important that you talk to your GP or health visitor to make sure they're okay with kind of you making any changes. Often they will be able to signpost you to the relevant people if you need extra help. So let's touch a little bit on the sleep environment, because I'm a big believer in, as I said, setting up for the right thing. I think my camera's now gone. I know, honestly, this is a bit of a Right, now let me. Oh, I'm back again. Right. So own room from 6 months is key. Independent sleep space is one of the things that I really promote. Not that we're ignoring the child, but if you've got a small baby that's in with you, perhaps giving them their own space to sleep in is really important. So make sure that you are, connecting with them in the right way. But perhaps this means if you've got like a next to me setup, once you've got through the early kind of phases, maybe that's after sort of 4 months, giving them a bit of space to kind of have their own independent sleep space, and that will help them to kind of transition into their own room when it's ready for that. We don't promote any sort of sleep positioners, so sleepy heads, etc. aren't advised anymore, unfortunately. Things like sleeping bags can be great after you've gone through the swaddling stage, which is normally up to about 10 to 12 weeks. They help them to feel cozy and they don't kick them off. And also kind of keeping it simple from like a flashing light, mobile kind of point of view. That's also and not advised from a sleep point of view because it's just distracting. We want it just to be simple and all about sleep. Blackout and darkness levels at this time of year are so key. So if you've got a child that's been waking up early or is struggling to settle down for sleep at night, then I would really encourage you to look at your sleep environment. I mean, you can see here in this room, it's really bright, even, through the day, and it would be hard to kind of settle down. So we need to kind of make sure that you have the layers of blackout that will help your child to sleep. Things like travel blackout blinds, always my favorite kind of tip or just, a piece of cardboard or something along those lines, just to stop the light from coming in, because at 5 a.m, if you get a splinter of light coming through, it can really wake your child. I'm not a fan of night lights for children unless they are expressing their kind of scared of the dark, and that happens normally from earliest 2 years old. So before then, keep the light levels really low, as dark as possible through naps and through bedtime, just to help your little one sleep the best that they can. And that's all due to the melatonin production we talked about earlier. So in terms of things that are kind of good to have, I'm a big fan of white noise as well. So, kind of using something simple. You can get machines that will play white noise, and they're great. But I would also advise you to think about something like an untuned radio or, kind of like an app playing on a device. Now, that's the sort of sleep environment. My second fundamental to kind of talk through is all about the routines of the day. And so what we're looking at here is then saying, okay, what does your child's routine look like? Now, from my point of view, I'm a big fan of saying it's okay to have a flexible routine, because what happens with us is, I've lost my camera again, haven't I? I'm going to try and let's see. Why is my camera going? This is not what I needed. Oh, I am back. I hope everyone can see me okay. I'm sorry about this all kind of confusion. It looks like I can't be seen. Right. Okay. So yeah, routines of the day are really important to help your child get into the best place for sleep. So this is looking at awake time. So if you haven't heard of the concept of awake time, and most people have, it's all about how long your child can stay awake before they need to sleep again. So it varies across the ages, and in the first 12 months, it really massively varies. So you can go from, kind of a baby of around sort of 3 to 4 months who can only stay awake for a couple of hours, up to a child of sort of, I suppose, 12 months that could potentially stay awake for around 4 hours. And of course, okay, sorry, someone's just put a comment. I just want to check whether you can see me. It's working fine. Oh, now things falling over. I think I'll just continue. I'm just going to let it all happen. Okay, so it's all about working out where you are in that framework of the awake time. If you don't have my sleep needs guide, I will send this out on the email later, so you can get a hold of that. So you can work out where the average is for your child. And they are very, very much averages, because no one child is the same. And that's really important to note. So have a look at kind of the average awake time, because when I talk about things like short nap issues, bedtime settling issues, often we'll delve into it and say, okay, you've got a 6-month-old and they are only having 2 naps and you've got an awake time that's somewhere closer to 5 hours, when actually they can really only stay awake for 3.5. And so all of those things can really contribute to unsettling your day. So if you can work out what your child's awake time is based on the average, and then perhaps looking at what they show you, and so that'd be looking for their tired signs, looking for how they settle and whether that's kind of causing them any issues, then you can start to build a better framework from there. So the most important thing for me in terms of a child's sleep situation, and I was talking with a client about this morning, is actually about them getting a good rest in the day so that they can fundamentally sleep better at night time and help them to settle for bedtime and sleep in a good way then. So the thing about the daytime is not driving anything like overtiredness, because if you drive overtiredness, you're going to find a situation whereby you get to bedtime and it's a difficult situation. And also you'll find that in the nighttime, it's possible for them to be waking up because they haven't settled well in the day. So the second thing, aside from the awake time, is obviously how much sleep they need in the day. And again, this is a guide that I will send out. So you might find that let's take a 6-month-old again. Sometimes, if I've got a child that's really suffering with sleep, we'll look at the amount of time they're sleeping for in the day. And the recommended level is somewhere around 3 hours for a 6-month-old. And that child might be sleeping for 2 hours, and they might be taking these kind of really short naps. And that's where we go, okay, we need to increase the amount of daytime sleep to help them settle, because it's really all about a 24-hour period of sleep, and how much, not period of sleep, but 24-hour section, and how much of that 24 hours do they need to be sleeping for to be well rested. And that will vary child by child, as I've been saying, but normally for most ages actually, it will be between 10 to 12 hours at bedtime and nighttime, and it's the daytime that varies. And it's all about kind of working out how much sleep your child's having in the day and how much sleep the child is having at nighttime, and whether that fits for them, whether that's causing them to be more unsettled. Sometimes, like I say, if we don't have enough sleep in the day, it can make the night times more disruptive and the bedtime settling. And the opposite also can happen, is if you have too much sleep in the day, then actually you can find that your child wakes in the middle of the night. And this is often, if they wake happy in the middle of the night, you can find that they are perhaps not tired enough and they haven't really they've had too much sleep in the day to then sleep properly in the night time. So all of those things are really important to consider. One of the major factors to understand around the overtiredness angle, as we were speaking about before, is that if you need to bring your bedtime earlier, although it is good to have a consistent bedtime, as I said, it's better to override that if you've got an overcharged child. So bring your bedtime earlier to help them to settle better. Now, the last part of the kind of the routine thing is to talk about during the day, is talk about the naps and the transitions. So again, often a kind of a troubleshooting point is that we get to these kind of moments and suddenly you've been on a nice schedule for a while, but then your naps suddenly go awry, and that's because you've hit a nap transition fundamentally. So the nap transitions generally happen around 4 months. We often find that you're coming down to 3 naps a day. And then around about 6 to 7 months, you're coming down to about 2 naps. So that's quite a quick transition. And then you normally stay on 2 naps until around 14 months. I have seen children transition earlier, and sometimes we find that nurseries want to do the transition earlier, but look at your child and see what they're showing. And then, the dropping the 1 nap can happen anything from 2.5 years onwards, really. My kids slept until they were over 3. My sisters dropped it before 2. So keep an eye on what they're showing you. The key transition issues that you will face are all about noticing when they do not settle well for their naps. So if they have previously settled well for a bedtime sleep or for a nap time, struggling to do so, that might be a sign that transition is coming. And that's all because they can stay awake for longer, and because their awake time, as we spoke about earlier, has extended, and they can actually settle later on. And so that's why the day then has to slightly shift in terms of the routine. So again, I will send that out. That's in my my download if you haven't got it already. Now, the last part of the routine section is really thinking about the routine for your child. And for any age, routines are a brilliant way of setting up for good sleep, whether that's nap times or bedtimes. Children love routines. And again, I often I was talking about this with a different client this morning, saying about actually we just need to transition the child into a different routine. They're very happy with their current routine, but it's not helping their sleep situation. So we're now transitioning into a kind of a new routine. And what you need to bear in mind is that if you can repeat and do the same kind of routine each day, then your child will switch into that. And that is, like I say, of any age. They thrive on routine. If you've got kind of an older child that's struggling to settle, maybe drawing out that routine, making it kind of pictures you could just, kind of take from the internet or draw yourselves of the different component parts of the bedtime routine, especially if you're making changes. That could be really powerful to help them stay on that journey with you. But for a smaller child, decide your routine, work with it, and keep going to help them understand that's the way that now things are going to be happening, and you can kind of make sure that they understand it more. So for naps, we want a slightly different approach because we don't have the space and time that we'd have at bedtime to settle them down. So you might only have like a kind of a wind down of sort of 5 to 10 minutes before a nap. And so that might just look like I don't know, perhaps reading a book, doing a quick song, even just getting changed, closing the curtains. All of those kind of things can be kind of good to set up for your nap time routine. And so make sure that you're kind of enacting that. And then I've spoken about overtiredness already, but I just want to kind of reference it in terms of what happens with the kind of the sleep, because we often find that if a child's overtired, they might only sleep for a short period of time. And in a nap situation, dealing with short naps can be tricky and frustrating. But one of the key things to sort of do is just to try and manage it through. So I spoke about before about actually knowing how much sleep your child needs in the day. So if you have got a child that's sleeping for a short period of time, check through the kind of the fundamentals. So, what's going on with the tiredness levels? Do they need to increase the awake time to help them sleep for longer? But if they wake up after a short period of time and they're a bit grumpy with it, then maybe rush to them and just help them to sleep in any way possible, and see if you can get them to elongate that nap so that it will help them to stretch out, get a better rest, and head for the next nap or bedtime in a better state. Okay, so the next sort of big part to talk about is settling. So this is, again, if I go back to what I was saying earlier about the sort of the gentle versus the stricter methods of sleep training, I wanted to give you a kind of an overview of the different techniques, because when we consider how a child is settling, it's often important for us to take a step back and work out whether that settling method that you're using is causing a child to be slightly more disturbed in terms of their sleep pattern. And that's all down to the sleep cycles that we were talking about first off. And really, it's important to kind of have in your mind what changes you might be looking to make, and if they're relevant to you. And I'll say it again, but I'm not forcing anyone to make any sleep changes here. I'm just saying, understand what might be causing your issues. So when we look at kind of much younger children, and if they've got quite an involved situation, so let's say, for example, there's a lot of rocking or feeding to sleep that's going on, a child that's sort of under 6 months, you can often do something like a pick up, put down routine. So that might look like laying your child down. And I am a big advocate of putting your child down in an awake state so that you're setting the scene. And if we think back to kind of how they sleep, then if you put them down in a awake state and you can get them to settle consciously so they know what's happening, then that can stop any confusion when they come to the end of their sleep cycle and be going like, where am I? Because if they've fallen asleep in your arms, or perhaps if you've been feeding and they wake up at the end of that cycle, they can be looking around for that person to help them to get back to sleep. So if you put them down in an awake state and help them settle from that basis, it can really help to transition them into better periods of sleep. So the pick up, put down method is literally like saying, okay, put them down, awake, reassure them, and then if they get upset, pick them up again, and then put them down again once they're calm, and repeat that method. Now, you can leave them in their sleep space for as long as you like, or for as little as you like. That is really very much up to you. The one watch out is that sometimes after 6 months, sometimes it's earlier, they get more frustrated by being picked up and placed back down again than they get from the kind of the effort that you're putting into calming them. So if you're going to try that, make sure you're aware of what's happening with their kind of settling. Then you have a kind of more of a gradual retreat sort of process. And this is often quite a favoured method for sleep consultants. I use it a fair amount actually, but sometimes I change it depending on the child's sleep situation and kind of what they're showing. And this is all about sort of staying with your child, helping them to settle a lot in the beginning. And this is about reassurance, limiting the crying, making sure that they're in the best situation for sleep, but staying with them and helping them to settle in arguably in whatever way works. And there's no kind of hard and fast rules. And the picking up can be a bit of a question mark, but it depends on the age of the child and their kind of awareness of the world. And then over time, you limit your interaction. You sort of set a time frame. You go, I'm going to spend a few nights here, and then I'm going to sort of sit a bit further away, and you work your way kind of out of the room and help them to settle basically on their own over time. That's the kind of the middle of the road sort of approach. And then we get into, I suppose, the more stricter, perhaps, techniques that have the kind of the more crying attached to them. And so the first one is probably control crying, and then that is a sort of a time limited way of doing things. So it would be saying, okay, you put your child into their sleep space, you leave them and you wait a certain amount of time. There are very many different techniques. If I do this, which is not very often, we start with a low number and then we work up from that if we need to. Often we don't. People will often sort of quote me the Ferber method, which is the incremental time. And I mean, it can work. It just depends on, kind of how you feel about increasing the amount of time as the night goes on. But it's really about kind of working out whether that method works for you. And some children, I will tell you that some children do not like being interfered with when they're settling. Some children actually just need a bit of time to have a bit of a whinge about it, and then they will go to sleep. And it's amazing how quickly that can transform. So again, it's about kind of understanding your little one. Now, the last kind of version that I will sort of talk about, and this is something I don't do, I really have never done this, and I doubt I ever will, is the kind of the extinction method, and that's basically cry it out. So cry it out gets this kind of name of, it gets attached to so many things, but actually cry it out itself is the bare bones of putting your child down, leaving the room, and not going back until they've settled. And it's just, I don't think that's quite right. Anyway, then so that could take quite a long time, or actually, I suppose it could take a short amount of time, but it's that kind of far end of the sleep scale. Used quite, I think, in old school methods, but not something I would recommend. Now, in terms of the settling and other considerations, because this is a big sort of thing to kind of talk about, think about whether it's working for you, what you're doing. If it's not, make the changes. Think about who is going to make the changes. So if you've got a kind of a very involved feeding situation, for example, is it right that you, as the person who's feeding, and I'm being sort of very general here, are in terms of the mums doing the feeding situation, is it right that you are going to be changing your method and your child will be okay with that? Because sometimes it's too confusing. So what I would suggest you do is then maybe consider getting your partner or husband involved and getting them to help settle. So you might do the feed and then pass over to your partner to help settle. Do that for 2 to 3 days and then switch around, because it's all about trying to get the rotation of people doing it rather than one person being attached to just settling the whole time. So make sure you rotate the responsibility as much as you can. Now, the starting point, as I said before, is always trying to get your child to go down fully awake as possible. Again, if you've got a child that's very sort of attached to feeding to sleep, just try and get them to more of a awake state before putting down. That might mean doing the feed slightly earlier in the routine, but it's about sort of just trying to encourage more alertness with going down, so they're more conscious of settling. So think about what works for you. If those harsher techniques aren't right, then don't do it. If your current situation is okay, then don't worry about it. The key thing is really just about moving kind of forward and making sure that you're happy with the progression that you're making. So that's quite a lot of chat about settling. So I make no apologies for that, because I think it's one of the most important things to kind of talk about. But the next thing I wanted to talk about was night wakings, because it's one of those, again, slightly contentious things that people will talk about, is that actually how much do we want to push night wakings? How much is it natural for a child to wake? And it is normal for a child to wake in the night, I suppose. Sleep cycle. But also it's whether it's normal for you. So if you've got a baby that's and let's put the 6 month mark again, you've got a baby that is waking up 6 times in the night at 6 months, that might not be quite right for you. If you've got a baby that's waking up twice in the night at 6 months, again, that might not be right for you. Or you on the other side of the fence and go, that's kind of all fine. Well, I would encourage you to think what's acceptable to you, because that might look very different to the next person. So, we can look at it from night wakings from view. The first point is to say, okay, your goal is to reduce your night wakings, and you really want to head down that journey, and you want to make it. And that's when you come into kind of more involved sleep training, and that could be about restricting feed. So you might be saying, okay, I'm not going to feed my child for 3 hours, because that's what they do in the day, and you would resettle them either side of that. Well, the other way of doing it is that I'm going to focus on why they might be waking. So perhaps improving the settling and improving the nap time situation. That should help them sleep better in the night, and you wouldn't really pay much more attention to the night wakings. So it's all about kind of where your situation is. So the main causes of night wakings are often, aside from a nutritional need, which, as I've said, can be really relevant up until a year, arguably, and what's right for you. But past that, we start to think about whether the nutritional need is there. But also the elements of kind of causing for night waking can be overtiredness, can be what's gone on with the settling. It can also be kind of the environment as well. So we've talked about kind of how to address those. So when you've got a kind of a child that's woken in that, what would you do? My advice is to think about your response, because often if we kind of jump straight up and go and attend to our child, whatever age that may be, we're sort of telling them that it's okay to wake in a way. If you've got a child that's feeding or has any kind of issues or medical needs, then of course you should do that. But if you're trying to make changes, maybe just wait a short period of time. That could be 30 seconds. It could be a couple of minutes. If they're just sort of whinging, maybe just leave them for a little. Let them try and settle themselves, because that can be really beneficial to help them to go back to sleep without your kind of environment. And then once you've kind of gone over to them, I'd encourage you to think about just continuing the process that you've been doing at bedtime in terms of your settling. If you've been making changes, follow that through so you can help them to settle as well in the nighttime. Consistency is really key when it comes to children's sleep. So making sure you're acting in the same way will help them to understand this is the new kind of process. And really one of the again, kind of one of the trick type things, the gentle sleep book type tricks, is about recognizing that if you're going to feed your child, if you can put them down in a little bit more of an awake state than you normally would, so let's say they're feeding entirely back to sleep, then I would suggest that you would try and wake them up a little bit more. Just even do a pretend nappy change or a nappy change, something like that, make sure they're winded, and then pop them down. That can really help them to start that next sleep cycle on a better basis. They're fully fed, they're not entirely back to sleep, they're going to go round the sleep cycles and hopefully sleep for a bit longer. Now, from a younger child point of view, think about your dream feeding, because people like a dream feed, but actually well, if it works, great. If it doesn't work, then perhaps there's no kind of real role for it. And to judge that, if you're doing a dream feed and then they're waking up an hour or two later, perhaps it's not really giving them the essence of sleep that you were looking for. But if you're doing a dream feed and they're sleeping for another 4 or 5 hours, perhaps it is. So consider your role for the dream feed in that. And with older children, if you've got an older child, then you want to be kind of conscious as to what they're doing and what they're after. So if they're coming to you, if they want you to come back into their room, stay consistent with the response, try and make it so that it's non-eventful, ask them to sort of resettle, and maybe think about kind of setting some sort of boundary lines in terms of how they are going back to sleep and what you accept. So if you, for example, are doing a gradual retreat kind of method, if you're trying to get your older child to settle, tell them that you're not going to lie in the bed, and make sure that's kind of key. So they're starting to settle more independently, and keep consistent with that. And hopefully that will transition them through to feeling more confident in sleeping on their own. So when we're looking at other kind of considerations and other sort of troubleshooting issues, next thing I wanted to talk about was early rising, because that can be a really common thing, and we touched on it earlier. So the main causes for early rising are overtiredness, and it's one of those kind of slightly old wives tales of don't kind of put your child to bed earlier because they'll wake earlier, because actually in overtiredness angles, the overtiredness can really cause your child to wake earlier if they have been had a shorter nap day, because the levels of cortisol that builds up towards bedtime, if their child is overtired, will cause them to, and they might settle okay, but it can start to sort of build up through the night. And especially as you get ready for the morning time, which is what we see when we get kind of past the sort of 2-3 o'clock mark in the night, the lighter sleep starts to happen. Your child is then easier to wake because they're in a lighter period of sleep. And if they're overtired, it can cause them to wake further. So all of those things combined means that overtiredness can cause the early rising. So I would advise you in that situation to put your child to bed earlier, or encourage longer naps in a day. The other angle is the light, which we've spoken about. So a dark room for early rising is really, really important. And potential sound that happens, you've got birds tweeting. I got woken up by the birds the other day. Oh my God, it was so frustrating. So you might want to consider white noise in the room, as we've spoken about. And that can be good for, ages up, so well, as long as you need. It's quite good for adult sleep as well. So think about that to help with the early rising. And then, just keeping going is the key thing with early rising, testing things out. If you've done an early bedtime, you might then want to kind of consider a later bedtime to try and push it out a little bit more. Those are things that you would have to work through the process of, and I've got kind of a pack on that if you're interested in understanding a bit more about that. Last couple of bits I think we're getting to before we go to questions. So think about your questions and we'll come to it in a minute. I've talked a little bit about older children, but it's really important that we kind of recognise the needs of our older children as well. So the routines that you can set up, the conversations that you can have, you can start to think about kind of almost like goal setting with them. And what would you like them to achieve? And if you can break it down in slow levels, then you can help them to achieve those goals and sort of build from them. So what I mean by that is, like, if you've got a child that you want to help to sleep through the night, find something that they can do really well around sleep. Maybe it's just getting changed and ready for bed. Reward them for that, and then move to the kind of the next stage of that, which might be that they fall asleep nicely, and then reward them for that. And then build up to something like, more like staying in their bed all night, reward for that. And then it could be about sleeping through the night. And by rewarding, what you could do is just give them something surprising with breakfast. So it could be like a chocolate button or a raisin or something like that, just to say, you did amazingly. Here's a kind of a little treat to help you understand that if you do more like that, you'll keep getting rewarded, and really celebrate those kind of those moments. From an older child point of view, also, we need to kind of understand that there sometimes can be some anxiety around bedtime. So if you have a child that is kind of quite hectic around bedtime or does have anxiety, think about kind of like more mindfulness techniques. Often we talk about this in terms of relation to adults, but it's really coming into play in terms of children as well. So doing things like star breathing, I'm not sure if you've seen this before, but you can do things where you breathe up the side of the hand and then down, and you breathe in and out as you go round the hand, just to help the focus of the breathing. It can help to kind of calm things down. That could be really great. And then something I learned from a recent training course I went on was this concept of love bombing. So if you imagine a child that's kind of a little bit anxious around bedtime, just shower them with love and hugs, and just, kind of really be involved at bedtime, because it helps them to feel safe and secure. It helps to build the attachment, and it can help to stop kind of any worries. So a little bit on older children. I just thought I'd add that in, because all the concepts do apply to older children, but often I find myself talking about babies a little bit more. So I wanted to make sure if you've got an older child, there's some advice for you there. Now, I've talked about regressions and illnesses as earlier. They happen. We will, kind of all have to manage through them. But the key thing is, once your child is better, just get your sleep back on track, because I'll often talk to people that will find that their child's been ill and then their sleep has gone out the window and it's never come back. Now, you often do have to actively get your sleep back on track, but often it's much easier to do that than in the initial stages. So don't let the regression or the illness be the excuse for bad sleep, really. So that's everything I wanted to kind of talk through. They're the fundamental things that I believe are there to get your sleep back on track. The important things to take into account. Maybe sit down and have a think about it. I'd love to, kind of think that I've given you some food for thought. Make a plan, like think about kind of what you might need to change. If you don't have the information, I will be sharing some stuff later, as I said, and obviously we can interpret that for your child, and you can look at kind of making your plan to make changes. I often say that it's about sort of probably around 2 weeks you need to focus on it fully. Sometimes it can take a bit longer, but often it's just about kind of having that plan and following it. And if you find that you don't know how to make the plan, or you don't know kind of what to do, then obviously you can come and find me, and I'm very happy to help. I have a kind of a sleep help form that you can fill out on my website, or just drop me a message. And the group that I mentioned is starting next week, so I have I think I've got 9 spaces left on it at the moment, and I will be helping a group of families get their sleep back on track in that 2 weeks. And there's an offer for you that I mentioned with the code, but I'll send it out because I can't show on my screen because the technology is not working. So please do let me know if you have any kind of questions. I've seen one come through from Elvira. So she's got a 6-month-old, still has some 30 minutes rather than 45 minutes naps. Does this kind of mean anything? When you're looking at kind of the sort of the daytime sleep, it's really, as I sort of was saying through the chat, that it's about the total sleep in the day. So from a 6-month-old, you'd be looking at something around sort of 3 hours total sleep in the day. So in a way, it doesn't matter how long those naps are, just as long as you're totaling up 3 hours in the day. Now, if you're having 6 30-minute naps, then that's quite a lot of naps, and that's probably not something I would advise, and you won't have enough time in the day to do that. So I would think about trying to assess what's going on with the awake time, what's going on with the settling and the environment, to perhaps help them sleep longer. Short naps can be tricky though at that age, but it's really just about balancing it all. And if you have a difficult day with naps, then go for a kind of an earlier bedtime. So I hope that helps to answer that. I'm just checking whether there's any other questions coming through. Does anyone have any kind of questions to ask at all, or anything they wanted to go over? Please do kind of let me know. Otherwise, I think we are a couple coming through, so nearly done. So another question: can white noise be too loud? Yes, it can. You can measure it. Decibels are the measure of sound. I think it's about 50 to 60 decibels is the kind of the time that we the noise, that level that is recommended. But I sort of say that's about conversational level. So you want to kind of so that it's present in the room and it's there, but it's really just about kind of helping them to absorb any kind of outside environmental noise. Okay, so Harriet said near 6-month-old settling fine to start with, but feeding in night and finding it hard to resettle. So yeah, this whole kind of concept of split nights, which we often find. And so a split night is a phrase that's sort of been, I don't know where it's come from, but it talks about the fact that your child will sleep well for the first part of the night and then have much more of a unsettled night, unsettled night for the second half of the period of the time. Now, the reason for that, as I said earlier, is that we find that we know from the way that the sleep cycles work, is that the first half of the night has a bigger proportion of deeper sleep. So it's much more restful sleep in terms of the way that they are less likely to wake. So we often find that that's a good period. And then you get into the lighter sleep in the early hours. so you get more proportionately lighter sleep. It's easier for them to wake, and so we can find that actually you get more trouble there. And that's just telling you why it happens, not how to solve it, obviously. So the key things, as you can imagine, is to say, okay, can you help your little one settle well? So you're saying they're settling well for the initial sleep, but then I would focus on trying to resettle as independently as possible, and maybe in a little bit more of an awake state after the feed that you're doing, so that they can settle back down into that sleep there and sleep for longer. The other factor is looking at kind of the daytime naps and making sure they're not too overtired. And kind of paying it a bit of attention, making sure that they're well fed, well winded, and helping that helps. So I hope that helps. Okay, so Ashley and Sophie White have said, hi, I have a 9-month-old, same problem as Harriet, but feel like the only fix is breastfeeding. Yeah, I mean, they go down more awake, but seem too awake. Yeah, I mean, give yourself the confidence that if your child is happy in their sleep space, that you don't need to attend to them unless they're unhappy. Some people are always kind of like, okay, I need to get them back to sleep immediately. If they're not falling asleep immediately, don't worry about it. And actually, sleep latency, which is how long it takes us to fall asleep, should be somewhere between 5 to 15 minutes. So yeah, feed your children in the night if they are needing it. Wake them up slightly to put them down, and then maybe help them to settle. If you're kind of going through a process of trying to help them to resettle in the nighttime, you don't have to spend hours working on it. You could just say, I'm going to give it half an hour and try and help them to resettle, and then kind of just perhaps help a little bit more, because it might be that there's something else causing them to wake, which is why we need the sort of the bigger picture of all the settling and the daytime naps to help them together. So I think maybe take the step back, think about maybe settling them for more of an awake state. If you can do that at sort of, let's say, 12 o'clock at night, and then they sleep better, it's worthwhile putting that effort in once in the night and properly doing it, rather than sort of trying to go, oh god, I'll just feed them back to sleep, and then they're up an hour later, because then you're doing it twice. So consider that. Okay, Jessie saying, so my 18-month old is capable of sleeping through the night, had a couple of beautiful nights, great, but more recently always difficult from 3 o'clock, consistently waking up crying multiple times for the second half of the night, really struggling, cries and cannot settle himself, and seems wide awake. Now even breastfeeding or co-sleeping don't help, and she's worried about waking up his sister. Okay, I think it's hard to understand sort of the full situation. So, thinking about whether the naps in the day are good. So an 18-month-old probably on one nap now, probably somewhere between 1.5 hours and 2.5 hours of sleep. And you kind of want to be helping them to get that good rest and going to bed at a good time. Check your overtime. Is that 3 o'clock mark? Is that kind of that split night situation that we've been talking about again? White noise would be good for this as well. And then other factors such as the settling, and whether you are feeding or whether you've been doing anything like that. Possibly at this age, you want to start maybe stopping the habit if that's kind of been going on. But I think sometimes if you can, and especially, I suppose it's Thursday, at the weekend, we can find it's quite good to make changes, because you can take the pressure off the days, perhaps, although there's lots more going on now, isn't there, with lockdown lifting, which is great. But, if you can make changes across the weekend and then help the little sister, if she does wake, to just go back to sleep and compensate for that. In the short term, it might be painful for everyone, but in the longer term, it might be better to kind of get that consistency going. So yeah, hope that helps, Jessie. I don't know if there's any other questions. I'll just ramble on for a couple of minutes just in case anything else happens. But thank you so much for joining me. It's always great to kind of have people come along when you set these things up. So that's great. I will be sending out, as I said, especially because I couldn't get the presentation to work. I think my computer has not been helpful to me today. What I will do, we'll send out the information with the sleep needs, so you can have that analysis, and I'll send out the recording as well, in case you kind of want to see me not be able to present again. Not that anyone really does, but I would really love to kind of invite you to get involved with any more help. If you would do so, I'll put more information there, so keep an eye out for it. I love kind of helping people out. I do Q&As on a Monday on my Instagram and on my Facebook. So I'm always happy to kind of answer questions. Oh, a couple of late questions coming in. Thought it might happen. 10-month-old that sleeps through but has to be held to go to sleep. Would pick up, put down the best way to go? I think as a starting point, give it a go. It might be a bit old for pick up, put down because they might just get more annoyed. You could just try and put them down and see what happens. Offer lots of support, lots of kind of interaction. Give it a go, and see kind of how you respond to it. So yeah, give it a go. I think it's the best thing. Carleen, I joined late, but have you got a 15-month-old who doesn't sleep at night for more than 2 hours at a time? He wakes and stands and screams. Okay, so we probably talked about a bit of it. It might be worthwhile if you all kind of must have the email because you've joined in. I'll be sending out the recording. We talked about the settling because often a child that will wake up and kind of want attention will be looking for something to help them to go back to sleep. So in that situation, 15-month-old probably, well, it's a bit of a transitional age, maybe on one nap, probably about kind of 2.5 hours, middle of the day. Watch your bedtime isn't too late because that can cause them to be difficult to settle, helping them to settle independently. If your child is standing up, and this is one thing I didn't mention, so it's a good question. If your child is sitting up, standing up, I'm not a fan of getting into the game of placing them down and them standing back up again. I would try and encourage them to lie back down themselves. That's kind of really sort of vital to do so they learn to do it. So try and be as least involved as possible. But maybe if it's taken like 10-15 minutes and you've been trying to calm them, trying to get them to lie down, then maybe you'd place them back down again. If he's waking up, Colleen, at sort of like 2 hours at a time, that's quite frequently. So it might be worth looking at kind of what the settling situation is. Have they got a dummy that's falling out, causing the weight? Do they sort of attach with someone to help them settle? And it might be worth trying to work away from that as well. Try and catch the first part of the recording if you can. That might help you. Otherwise, get in touch. Ashley, oh, thank you. That's great that it was helpful. And yeah, I do love sharing information. Thanks, Claire. Victoria also just joined. 4-month-old who won't sleep ever. Oh, have you covered how to master naps? If so, I'll check out the recording. Yeah, so we talked about the kind of the journey and the fundamentals. So maybe check out the recording. 4 months can be tricky with naps, but just have a look at it. If I don't answer your question in that, then please do get in touch. So Carlene saying he feeds to sleep. Okay, so perhaps you can either adjust your kind of feeding to sleep at bedtime, or try and adjust it in the nighttime. Just try and bring it back from feeding to sleep to perhaps more independent, feed him, and then maybe pass him over to a partner, husband, if possible. Maybe across the weekend's a good time to do it and see how you go on. They could just rock him, they could hold him, you could do that. Try and just encourage a bit more independent sleep, and then again after the feed in the night, if they're feeding in the night, which they're saying they are, then just try and get them to settle from a bit more independently. That could be a real kind of key changing point for that. Oh, great, more questions. Ashley's saying, how many night feeds is appropriate at 9 months? Well, good question. As many as you feel happy with. I think by then, if I'm being honest, if you're kind of doing more than one, maybe an early morning one just to get them to go back to sleep, you probably should be looking at kind of longer stretches of around about 5-6 hours. So, but it's what's acceptable to you. Remember, if you're trying to think about kind of weaning them off the feeds, then maybe think about doing a double feed before bedtime, like a top-up feed type thing. Make sure nutrition's good in the day. Have the confidence that you don't think they need it, and maybe think about reducing them. Okay, so just think, how would you encourage them to lie back down if they just stand there in the middle of the night when waking up? It seems like a battle of wills, especially if we aren't supposed to get too involved. You can do lots of encouragement. You can pat the mattress. You can reassure them. I'm not saying you don't need to get too involved. I suppose what we're saying is you don't want to be placing them down. So you can sort of reassure them. You could, kind of touch their hand, their shoulder, just encourage them to sort of lie down You're trying to keep them calm. That's kind of key. You could be singing, you could be using your touch, but it is a little bit, when it gets to toddler behavior, if I'm being honest, it becomes about what feels right for you. So some things, and I will, my kids are older now, but it's the battle of wills around, I want a biscuit, and they've just had three. So you don't give them another biscuit, and you hold off for it, and then you distract them with something else perhaps, or they get used to the fact that you're not going to get that extra biscuit. And it's a little bit like when it gets to the older kids, about applying that same sort of thought in the night time and go, no, it's time to lie down now, it's time to go to sleep, and keep consistent with that. And you might find a little bit of a battle, but it will go, because they'll get the message that you're not going to lie them down, and this is what you're asking them to do. So that's, I suppose, the slightly harsher way of doing this. If you wanted a softer approach, you could get involved, but try and limit your involvement over time. I think that's probably the balancing to that. I do love a balance, because I think everyone's different, and I don't know all of you, and I don't know kind of your ethos on things. So I want to make sure you've got the right information. So fab. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me. It's been really lovely to chat to you. Apologies for the technical issues, but we got there, and I'll be sending out the recording to everyone. Just a couple of thank yous coming up. So thank you for attending, and take care. If you do need any help, sleeptimeconsulting.co.uk. I will be there for you. All right. Take care. Bye-bye. Have a nice afternoon.